All right, George, we got a first timer on the show today from the Commander's Realm on Twitter. It's Eric Sully. Eric, how are you, man?
I'm good, guys. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Glad to have you on. First time for the show, so I'm a little excited. Uh, Over 25,000 on Twitter
Mhm.
is a big deal. How long have you had the account, and how has it grown over the years? Because that's a big number.
Yeah, so it's funny. I made it in my 11th grade English class back in 2016. I was just really passionate about the team. I remember we were coming off the 2015 season where it was the first Kirk year of like full time starter. And, he got into the playoffs, of course. We, ended up losing to Green Bay. But I remember that was like the most exciting offseason I had really since. I was excited when we drafted Griffin, of course. But other than that, since then, that was like the most excited going into the 2016 season I had been. And I just love talking about the team. And I would tweet on my personal account, like, or just like friends followed about the Redskins, and no one really cared. So I was like, I'm just going to start a separate account, and get involved in that community. And at the time, like Redskins, Commanders, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, wasn't that big, not as big as it is now. And it just kind of took off from there. I remember I guess the way it grew was I stayed to Washington, and I didn't really personify it at all. So I just kept it as like I wasn't a professional. Obviously, I was, 18 or whatever, 17. But I kept it Redskins. I kept it professional, and I just made sure that, I never argued with people. Like I never like did any of the drama. Like I just kept it, all Redskins all the time, and it just kind of grew. I think I hit 1K by like the end of that year, and then it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And I was fortunate enough to build up a following. I never really had a secondary, like I never had a big YouTube or like another account on another platform that like filtered into it. It just kind of built up.
But it's interesting because you don't necessarily tweet a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm.
I find what you do tweet interesting, but generally it feels like when people to get to that number, you got to be constantly tweeting. You think you were more active then than you are now?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Right.
The first 2, 3 years I was tweeting 50 times a day. Like, especially like I was the biggest Kirk. Actually, I was originally known, they called me Kirk Rum because I was the biggest Kirk supporter there was. Like, and a lot of people at the time were all like, it was like the fan base was 50-50, really. I thought like people didn't want to pay him. And then there's those who like me that are like, you got to pay him because that's how it works with the quarterback market. And it was me always, I was always debating that with people. And I think that was one of the things that really blew the account up, for better or for worse. And of course we didn't pay him, and we've had 15 quarterbacks since. So you can see how that went. But yeah, that was but yeah, the reason I don't tweet as much now is because I was in high school and college then, and I had a lot more free time. And now I have a full-time job, and I can't be glued to it like I once was. And on top of that, we've had a bunch of name changes. We've had all the off field stuff. And like everyone else, I think my passion has dipped a little bit. So hopefully with the recent news, that'll maybe change. But, it's like everyone else. I think a lot of the other bigger accounts kind of feel the same way. Like it's just not what it was even 6, 7, 8 years ago. So
there's no doubt. And I think you're right. The big news, of course, is Dan Snyder out, Harris in. I got to say this, and I'll be asking both of you your opinions on this, but I didn't get like this dancing in the street feeling that I thought I was going to get when Dan was out. Like I really thought there was going to be fireworks in my brain at least, and I was going to be all giddy about it. And frankly, I find myself not really caring. Like I'm so far over it that it felt like I took a brief exhale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It woo-sobbed the moment and then got excited about what's to come next. But I didn't have that sense of joy, I think, that I would have guessed that I had even, say, a year ago, 6 months ago, when we thought maybe all this was possible. George, is that are you on that level, or were you
really
out in the cul-de-sac?
It's really funny that you said that, actually. So, I saw a lot of the release videos for Dan Snyder being removed and, Josh Harris stepping in. People were dancing and singing and doing all these things, kind of over the top. And I just didn't have that perception. It's just kind of like, it was just a staggered release, right? Like right now we're still waiting for it to be finally approved
Correct.
and be put into effect in that regard, right? So we're kind of, I think that staggered approach of being released to Josh Harris is kind of slowing down the excitement. And plus, we're in the middle of the summertime. I think once the new improvements start happening, as we start seeing like the stadium being up, built up and the locker rooms being changed, I think the excitement will kind of build up in that regard too. So I think the biggest thing for me that kind of created some finality was just the Snyder's putting out that statement that we are selling it to Josh Harris, because we're like in Stockholm syndrome, man. Having Dan Snyder, he just put so much like stress and added pressure on us. We just didn't believe that he actually would sell the team. Like, it's always that one potential of a curveball where he could trick us in the end. So I think there's a finality happened. It feels good. It's more relief as you kind of alluded to. But I think the big excitement will be when we start seeing the changes happen, which will be pretty soon, hopefully.
Now, Eric, you've only known Dan.
Yeah.
So what is your thoughts? Like, I mean, George, are you old enough to get before Dan?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm born in the 80s. I look younger than I am, which is a good thing.
But for those of you like Eric, I mean, I'm curious, maybe there's a difference. Like, maybe there's a difference in the excitement level for somebody that like is dying for fresh air,
Yeah, it is. It's funny you say that, because I've always said, like, Dan bought the team when I was like 8 months old, so like I don't know any different.
Right.
The only real year that I guess I experienced like a pre-Dan feeling was the Griffin year, 2012. That's kind of what everyone's always said, was like that's the closest we've been, and they say even that wasn't quite what it was. But yeah, no, and it's funny you mentioned how you felt when it was finally announced. I tweeted it myself. I was like, it's a bit anticlimactic, I thought. Like, I think it's just because it took so long. Like, it was originally announced in November. We found out that he was thinking of
exploring it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we were kind of that was the most excited we were, and then it just kind of it built up and up and up. And then George, like you said, they came out with that statement, and I was like, oh my god. That's when I really kind of felt, I was like, because before then it's all of course third party and media reporting it, so you're kind of like, well, you never. But once I saw the statement, I was like, oh my gosh, this man's really going to sell this thing, because we never thought he would. He took pride in buying the team at 34, and imagine buying a team at 34. You're never going to sell that thing, and he finally did. We always thought it was going to be Jerry and the rest of the owners saying, "Hey man, you got to go," and that never happened. But like we were saying with like people my age with Dan, look, I'll be honest, I don't know any different. So I don't think I'm as excited as everybody else is. I am excited because it's become an expansion team. And, I am old enough to remember when it wasn't quite that. Yes, Dan's always been here, but I used to wake up and that's all I cared about every day was the Redskins at the time. And over the last 6-7 years, I don't know if it's because I've gotten older or just because they've been terrible, but I just haven't felt that way. And, a fish rots from the head down. So, to me, it does come back to Dan. And, once I mentioned Kirk. I always thought Dan was the reason Kirk, again, trickle down effect, didn't stay here. So once that happened, and then he finally, changed the name and all this stuff, I was like, all right, I've had enough. And from there on out, I was like, get out of here. Because the thing too is the one thing that Dan had, is that he always said he would never change it. And that kept some people on his side, I thought. Not necessarily me. I knew he was still a terrible owner. I wasn't that simple. But I know a lot of people, he had a little bit of a following that stuck with that. And once he got rid of that thing, I knew it was over. It was only a matter of time. Plus, he lost his minority owners. So
we won't spend a ton on name debate because I'm just not into it. But I do find it fascinating that, to me, that's what Dan left behind was like rubble and disharmony amongst a fan base that was once so unified. Like, it was amazing, even through apathy. I mean, think of all the great head coaches that Dan ran through, and we would still get excited. And I remember talking to my brother right before Shanahan got hired. Apathy was setting in. And that's, to me, that's the franchise killer, not hatred. Because if you hate something, you still care about it. Exactly. Once apathy sets in and you could care less, Like,
Mhm.
I remember not that long ago when I would be pissed on Sundays when the team lost.
Mhm.
And gradually I got to apathy. And it's a killer. It's hard to get out of that apathetic space. And I think new ownership was the only thing, because we were heading there.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, George, but it felt like the fan base, even with Rivera and the stand-up guy as he is, and things look, all things he had to deal with, it felt like apathy was setting in again.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think Eric nailed it too. Like going on, kind of reflecting on the fan base, the team for years just didn't give you something to be proud about, right? They always let us down. And that was kind of something sad because I love this team so much. Eric, just like you, I grew up, I have two older brothers. They're 10 years older than me. I was a baby when that Doug Williams Super Bowl happened. Like 92 was the first time I remember like actual football and like going and buying all the artifacts and having these banners up in my house. But, as he started getting into like the year 2000s, the early Dan Snyder era, the team has let you down consistently. Big primetime games, they would lose. Games they had to win, they would lose. They'd be, in regard to like court cases, this owner being in the news, bad news would come about and, kind of portray the team in a bad light. You couldn't brag and kind of put your chest out for the team. Yeah. So it definitely just kind of hurt after a while, and people started getting sick of it. And I think, Doug, I think you nailed it. I think apathy was setting into play. Like my two older brothers, the guys that put me onto this team, they barely even watch a football team anymore. They don't even care. Like it's like I wear, I'm a super fan. I'm wearing like the hat every single where I can go. They like make fun of me. Like, why do you care so much? I'm like, dude, I love it. Like it's my favorite thing in the world. They didn't even care about it. And it's just sad. And I think the team losing all those bad benchmarks that I've talked about, and then COVID. I think having all those different things with Dan Snyder's being, in the news and congressional hearings, and then having that COVID couple of years where the fans couldn't even go, they had to do something special to bring them back, and they didn't. And I think people were like, you know what, why am I going to buy tickets to this? It's kind of a ghost town anyway. And I think they have to kind of recoup the fan base. So hopefully this breath of fresh air, this new ownership, this new whatever they're trying to do should bring people back. And you can start to see it. People are getting excited again, which is pretty nice. It's like the shackles have been unleashed. There's a high upside with a new owner, which I'm excited about.
That's the first thing new ownership has to do, is get to the fan base. I don't care if it's, David Aldridge was on with me last week. He suggested slashing ticket prices, slashing food and vendor prices, like things you can actually do to win the fan base back. Changing the name isn't going to do that. People say that that's what it is. It's not. It's welcoming the fan base with open arms and saying, you know what? The last guy screwed it up. And we're here to apologize for him, even though we don't need to. And, let us woo you back. One last thing before we move on to like actual football stuff, because I do want to get there. For the folks that think, and you don't have to believe me, for the listeners when I say this, if you think Dan Snyder had significant say in the Commanders being the one that was chosen, you're missing it. That's just not factual. I've heard from plenty of people that are close enough that should know that was more an NFL Ron Rivera, Jason Wright thing than it was Dan Snyder. So for those of you that say, well, that's the stench of Dan Snyder hating the team, screwing us. The other thing is, talk to people inside the building, and for all of his failures, like if you want to find one thing to say nice about Dan on his way out, it was that he loved the team just as much as you did, George. He just couldn't get it right, and he wasn't a good person. I mean, that was his problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he loved the team. When you talk to people that are, that would say, oh, well, Dan, would Dan give Lamar the fully guaranteed contract just to stick it to the league, even though it might not have made sense for the Commanders? They'll tell you, no, Dan didn't do things despite the team. He loved the team. So for those of you that say he picked the Commanders because he knew you didn't like it, that's just not how it happened.
And then, Doug, to that point, Doug, when you know this, when Dan Snyder was hired, he was heralded as a savior. He was supposed to be like the biggest fan of the Redskins. He's taking over the team. He's going to turn things around. It's so funny. I saw a video recently. I'll tweet it after the show. It was Dan Snyder kind of gloating about how he's going to bring the team back. And he had swagger. Just so funny. We haven't seen Dan Snyder with swagger like 20 years. But he just had that confidence that the team's going to win. He's going to bring it back. And it was disappointing to kind of see how it all unfolded. It's like, but I think karma is a real thing. He mistreated people unfairly, and people kind of wanted to go after him, and he got taken down. So that's my perspective of it.
I think Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, like what you mentioned with the one thing about Dan is that he cared about the team. That's what I've always kind of said. Like, try not to be the most rude person towards him ever. Is like I put myself in that situation. I'm like, what if I bought this team as a fan, and then I turned out to be the worst owner in history of sports? I'm just like, man, that's got to be. I can't imagine how he feels now. Again, look how we all feel because of it. But just to
he has to leave the country because of it. How crazy is that? It's unbelievable.
He's like the most non-hated politician in DC. Like, hated non-politician in DC.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it is, and it's a great point. It was not for not loving the team.
Yeah.
It was just because he was not a good person. And frankly, he wasn't a good businessman. If you go back and look, he had one thing that hit. He parlayed that into the Redskins, and the rest is history because the NFL team is a money-making machine. I mean, it's why Harris. That's why you see the reports now from ESPN that Harris said, "Listen, we think we get $1.5 billion off the top from Virginia now because Dan's gone. We think we'll double the $174 million that locally was generated in revenues. Imagine that only $174 million was generated by the Commanders last year in the market. It's insane." And they know, and that's why the guy from Duke, right, was like, you don't have to have all the money because the NFL franchise is the money. Like, give me that franchise and I'll never be broke again because it makes money. You don't. That's the thing that I will always be so stunned when we remember the Dan Snyder era is it's not supposed to be that hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's supposed to be. It was supposed to be fun to own your favorite football team. Imagine it not being fun to own your favorite football team.
It's almost impressive what he was able to do. I think it was Kevin Sheehan always kind of mentions, like, it's impressive how, like, Harvard needs to do a study on this. Like, you have to try to do this. Like,
it's incredible.
It is. I mean,
and he tried it every single way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Upstart coach, Hall of Fame coach, quarterback centric, 43 defense, 34 defense. Up and calling play call. I mean, literally spending all the money, spending no money. I mean, he tried it every single way.
The brother of a Super Bowl winning coach.
That's right. and the only thing you can come back to is, to your point, George, he got his comeuppance every time.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, he deserved it. We didn't. So I'm happy for all of us today. George, let's get to the secondary because we were talking about this earlier today in the group chat.
Sure.
You assume that Quan Martin will not be the starting nickel. I think that when they drafted Forbes in the first round, they knew they didn't have any good options at nickel, which is why they were all but forced to draft a nickel in the second round. To me, it'll be interesting to see what happens to Kendall Fuller. Kendall Fuller and Benjamin St-Juste tried the slot last year. It's not for them. Benjamin St-Juste most certainly needs the boundary. And for whatever reason, Kendall Fuller does too, even though he's only 28, 29 years old, which always surprises me. It feels like he's 35.
Yeah.
Your takeaway was not that. I'm curious to hear you tell the folks why you don't think that's the case now.
Yeah, to clarify, I don't think Quan Martin is like totally exempt from the nickel position. I just feel like there's a glut right now. I do think Benjamin St-Juste will play the boundary. I do think Emmanuel Forbes will play the other boundary. So I kind of see Quan Martin and Kendall Fuller kind of like competing for that nickel role or that like additional safety role. Like who's going to play what, because they are going to get on the field. The reason why I'm kind of like erring on the side of Fuller is because he's getting paid $11 million this year, the fifth highest on the team. Like it's malpractice to have him on the bench or not use him appropriately. So I feel like they do have to deploy him somehow. And where are they going to do it? Maybe Quan Martin's a starting nickel, but does that mean Kendall Fuller moves back in like the safety position or free safety and kind of offer that option there? Or do we kind of flip it the other way around and Kendall Fuller's an experienced, veteran cornerback? Maybe he'll play the nickel this year and they'll kind of like sprinkle Quan Martin where as needed to kind of, because he's a flexible piece. I know you talked about it in the chat, and I agree with you. I think like it might be wise to kind of give Quan Martin one position to kind of refine his craft and be like a pure nickel in this year. So maybe he'll do that. For me, I just don't know where the fit is going to be, and I honestly think the coaches don't know right now. I don't think it's a definitive answer. I think training camp will kind of reveal some of that stuff. I think practice reps will kind of get it out there too. For me, it's like I just don't know where they're going to put Kendall Fuller. So my thought would be he'll probably get the first shot at the slot. Maybe Quan Martin will be like a Cam Curl, like kind of a relief guy, kind of come in off the bench, kind of fill in that like kind of Swiss Army knife role. That's the way I look at it. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Eric, $11 million, is Kendall Fuller up for a restructure or a cut? Can you see them cutting him? I don't know if we have enough depth on the boundary to cut him, but George is right. $11 million to ride the bench, a lot of money.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm actually a huge Kendall Fuller fan. He's always just been one of my favorite players. And the Kendall Fuller experience has been funny because if you remember, you drafted him in 2016. He got drafted at 21. That's why he's still so young. He if you remember his rookie year, he was wearing number 38 and he was just horrible. There was that Thanksgiving game against Dallas that year where Des Bryant was on him like every single play and he was just getting cooked. And that's funny because his second year he comes back, he changes the number and then he ends up being PFF's highest rated corner, I believe, that year. And he just has the best sophomore season you could have. And then they trade him. So it was like, oh my God, I was devastated. I was like, this is crazy. You just traded a young upcoming, and remember he played nickel then and he was good. And they traded him for, of course, Alex Smith. Then of course they get him back. They signed him for the 4 year, 4 years, 40 mil. I think he's been around 10 or 11 mil each year. And then I believe it was last year, he had a really good second half of the season. I mean, he played really well. He single-handedly won that Houston game.
When they moved into the boundary.
Yeah. So, yeah. And it's weird because like you said, at 28, for him to be too old to play the nickel, it's kind of crazy because there's guys who play that well into their 30s. So I don't know what happened there. I remember someone was on a podcast explaining that he just doesn't have the shiftiness that he had 5-6 years ago, which is surprising. To me, I think Kendall Fuller on the field, regardless of where you have him, makes the football team better. I would keep him on the outside where he finished strong last year. My question is St. Juice because there's an injury concern there. Again, if it's St. Juice, Fuller, if you can get St. Juice, Fuller, and Forbes on the field together, then great. But we know Forbes isn't going to play the nickel. At least we assume. No. Even though we just heard, someone said yesterday. He was
doing practice during a rookie minicamp. He was playing the slot, which is I think tinkering with things. I don't think he's going to do that. He's too small for inside. But yeah, I agree. It's interesting.
So so I saw that. I was like, But I think it'll be Quan. I think you're right about what they said because they got rid of Bobby McCain, which I was a little surprised. I understand the contract wasn't ideal. And then he goes to the Giants. But I think the Quan selection was a Bobby McCain replacement. I think either way, I don't know, maybe they're not 100% sure on Forrest. I can't, I'm not sure about that.
Forrest played great last year.
I loved Darren Forrest last year. He was the best ball hawk they had.
I agree.
But I think it's going to be Quan Martin. It wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if maybe Forbes isn't on the field to start the season, just being a rookie. That won't last. And here's the thing, corners, you can never have enough. The chance of all of them playing in every game, I mean.
I agree, 100%.
Fuller, St. Juice, they're not all going to play 17 games. So it's that's not a position I want to cut down on. And they also re-signed Danny Johnson, who has been ping-ponged off and on this team every year since Gruden was here. So, look, I mean, I'd rather have more depth back there than less. So I think it'll be Quan, though. I think it'll be their nickel.
And then one thing to kind of throw out there and sort of kind of derail it, Doug, but Ron Rivera met with John Keim during the Arizona owners meeting, and he said that, we value Kendall Fuller and we're going to tailor our defense around him, is what he actually said. I'll find that quote and I'll put it in the actual feed later on. But he actually said that. He said, Kendall Fuller is our most consistent corner last year. We're going to tailor our defense around him. That was before the draft. So we'll see how that actually shakes out and kind of breaks down. But it just kind of gives me a little peek behind the curtain of how Rivera feels about Fuller. So I don't see him being completely removed. They got to find a spot for him. So I just don't know where it's going to be. That's all.
It'll be interesting because they still got Percy Butler too.
Yeah.
Who flashed a little bit when he got opportunities last year, and they like him to move around a little bit. So it's odd. It feels like the secondary is one of our stronger units now.
Finally.
And when was the last time you could say that? John Taylor and LaRon Landry, maybe? I mean, you got to go back a long
That was on
time.
paper. That was on paper, too. That was
last time we drafted a corner in the first round, which was 2005. And now we finally did it again.
Yeah, that's right.
Carlos,
Which maybe speaks more to their concern about Benjamin St. Juice than it does Kendall Fuller. Maybe we've been looking at that the wrong way and assumed that because St. Juice is a young guy, that they'd want him out there. But when you think about Kenneth Fuller only being 28 years old, it's not like he's ancient, particularly if you're still going to if you can get the kind of production on the boundary that you got from him last year, then maybe it is him and Forbes outside.
It's a good problem to have. It's a great problem
It's
to have,
not
right?
a bad problem, George. Not a bad problem. I saw Joe Marino put out his thoughts on the Commanders earlier, and he was talking about the linebacker position and how Davis has really come along, and he has, particularly when they were calling him out earlier in the season last year, right? He ended up with a really good season. It's not like Bostic or Mayo, I don't think, will be the starting middle linebacker. That's what they brought in Barton for. But, I mean, what do we know about Barton, right? He didn't start for Seattle. Eric, it's a big problem for the fans that Ron refuses to upgrade the linebacker position. Are you falling for it, or do we need an upgrade?
Yeah, it's bugged me because this is year 4. Him and Ron and Jack Del Rio are former linebackers, and it's just been a glaring need all 4 years. And then I know they did take Jamin 19th overall, but I mean, 19th overall should be better than where Jamin is now. Now, again, like you said, he did have a little bit better of a season this year, and if he can just be a serviceable player, then by all means, I'm not going to complain. Like at this point, he's not a superstar. We know that. And then, of course, you let Cole Holcomb walk, which I was actually a little surprised about because I thought the end of 2022, or 2021, I thought he had a great year.
I did too.
And then he got hurt, of course, last year, and now I think he's with Pittsburgh now. So, I was a little surprised by that. And then they went out and they tried to replace him with the kid from Seattle. So, it has bugged me the whole time. There's been plenty of linebackers that have come out on the market. Bobby Wagner's been out a few times. And I know they're not big on signing these older guys, and I'm not huge on it either, signing, guys who probably have their better years behind them. But it's been surprising that it's been left as a glaring need all 4 off seasons. And again, it didn't look like, and John Bostic's, is their favorite player ever. So he's the one that survives out of all of them. So. Had you told me Cole Holcomb would leave before John Bostic, I would not have believed you. But
the Cole Holcomb thing stunned me too, Eric. And he did not get tons of money.
No, they could have kept.
It was a 1-year prove-it deal from the Steelers, right?
I think it was a surprise for them. Yeah, I think it was a 1-year prove-it deal for him. I don't know if it was money or the concern with his foot or whatever that was. I knew there was interest in him returning, but for whatever reason, I don't know if they had a hard line of this is how much we're going to pay, and the Steelers paid a little bit more to let him walk, or he felt disrespected. But I agree with Eric. I actually like Cole Holcomb. I think he has a pretty good athletic profile. He did play well in spurts. Health was always an issue, but I like synergy and consistency as well. And him playing next to Jamin Davis, it could have grown into a nice little pair. So yep. I'm disappointed that he left, to be honest with you. So we'll see.
The later round pick too. That was a
fifth round pick. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was odd. And hey, maybe they've got it right on Barton. Maybe we just keep banging our heads against the wall for no reason, and they just don't care. They'd rather have 5 defensive linemen and 5, DBs, safeties, and 1 linebacker, which they did a lot last year, which I like that 5-man front, which gets me to another draft pick, George, KJ. Hearing lots of good things about him from multiple different platforms. I had Jim Nagy on the other day. He had nothing but great things to say about him, and I know that one of the coaches for him was on with Hoffman, who also had nothing but great things to say about him. Sounds like a guy that is ready to come in and play immediately, even if just in sub packages.
Yeah, I agree. And just to shamelessly plug Doug's, I know he won't do that. He had an awesome interview with Jim Nagy the other day. It was a fantastic interview. He did talk about KJ Henry on the pod. And I think it's aligned from what I've been hearing as well. I try to get a national perspective on our draft prospects. And, if you keep listening to the Commanders reporters, they're going to say one thing, but you want to hear an objective third-party perspective, right? So listen to Jason Reed, Jim Nagy, Daniel Jeremiah, all those guys. Henry seems pro ready. I'm actually pretty excited about him. When they drafted him, I was like, that's pretty intriguing. I started reading about him. he seems like a high character, high motor guy. I believe he was a captain at his team. I think Jim Nagy might have said it on your podcast that like every coach kind of has like a red star player they kind of build around. They kind of use as like a as a soundboard, like what's the pulse of the locker room. Henry was that guy for Clemson, and that's strong. I love that. That's how Terry McLaurin was at Ohio State. You want those leaders in the locker room to kind of get out there. So high work ethic, a leader, good character. That's awesome. So that does provide a high floor for him. To kind of tamper expectations, I heard that he's gonna be more of a second effort kind of guy, as somebody that's gonna blow by you. He's gonna be somebody that kind of works hard as a grinder. But that's perfectly fine for like a third, fourth defense end. We need that depth position, that rotation there. So I'm happy with him, and we'll kind of see how it goes. The last thing I want to say is I think people critique his body structure as well. I think he has like a narrow upper half. So like in regard to like creating position and leverage against offensive linemen, he might not have that physical advantage. But like I said before, a second effort guy. And if you get some reps, if you get some rotation in the 5th round, that's a win for the draft class, in my opinion.
And not only that, it doesn't always translate, obviously, but I think people don't realize he was like the 3rd or 4th rated high school player the year he came out. Like he was a big time player. And one of the things Jim said, and it reminds me a lot of Montez, is he got a lot of pressures, but not a lot of sacks. So if you and he missed some time with an injury. So if you're just going by, which unfortunately is what we do, as they say, everybody's looking for the sack numbers, but the pressure rate, when you actually look at pressure rate for those that study the numbers, and I don't, I just listen to people that study the numbers, like that pressure rate is way more important or at least impactful. Maybe not important because unfortunately the sacks get you the money, so they are important. But the pressure rate is so much more impactful in a snap by snap, game by game basis. So it'll be easy to see what he does. Eric, do you think it signals the end of one of the ends that we already have here?
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, when it comes to like Montez and Chase, I don't see them having 4 guys on the D line, having all 4 having massive deals. So I've always thought one of them is going to end up walking. You mentioned Henry. My best friend went to Clemson, and he was ecstatic.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
that's good to know.
I mean, that's the pick I've been like. All my friends who know I'm in the team all mention like, oh, KJ Henry. It's not Ford. It's not Quan. It's not Stromberg. It's none of them. It's Henry. So that's the pick that like guys who maybe don't follow the team as much are like, oh, that's a good one. But yeah, I mean, I think they took him specifically because one of the two, Montez or Chase, are going to be gone. It's going to be a competition this year between the two. I personally think Chase will win that. I'm a huge Montez guy. I actually thought Chase was noticeable in the few games he played last year. So that's my guess. I think they'll end up giving Chase a big deal, assuming, especially if Ron somehow stays. If they're not going to let their number 2 pick walk, I don't think that'll happen. So, but yeah, I love the Henry pick. That was good. I've heard nothing, but like you said, high character guy, and you mentioned McLaurin. I mean, and that's been the theme with Ron the whole time.
Yeah, he's a type for sure, right?
I love his dad was a big Washington fan, came out in the jersey.
Jeremiah Trotter, I love it.
Yeah. So yeah,
20 Senior Bowl players selected by the Commanders in the last 3 years alone. So they have a type. They like guys with experience. They like guys that are willing to go to the events and prove it. And they've done that a lot. The other guy that Jim mentioned, of course, is my guy Jeremy Reeves, who doesn't really get on the field a ton. I wish they'd play him a little bit more. But obviously a special team ace. And I saw Cam Curl put on Twitter today that Revo had them all fired up out there. It's nice to see him at camp again. And the entire running back room, our Senior Bowl alumni, which I think is in Terry, of course, also. Eric, is this the year that we finally see Antonio Gibson unleashed, as they say?
It's funny. It's almost like he's been the forgotten man because obviously we know Brian Robinson and his story, and he was kind of all eyes were on him last year. You had J.D. McKissick, and he got hurt. He's now gone. I think he's going to be the feature of the offense. I think that's a shiny metal object when Eric Bieniemy looked at this roster and saw that's the name that stuck out to him, in my opinion. You saw what he did in Kansas City with McKinnon and Pacheco and all them. I think he sees Antonio Gibson, and that name lights up on the roster. So, and the thing is, they need to replace McKissick. They need to replace that role. And it's weird because when Gibson came out, he was going to be like this H-back. He was a receiver. Where did Memphis, I believe he was at.
Yeah, Memphis.
Yeah, like he was like more he was going to play. So, and now all of a sudden with McKissick gone, and the biggest negative from Gibson was the fumbles. And then I don't think he fumbled once last year. So it was just a usage issue and an O-line issue. It wasn't ever a Gibson issue. So if Gibson holds on to the ball, this could absolutely be the year it unleashes, but it will come down to the offensive line, I think, for him. We saw that last year.
What do you think the offensive line looks like by the time training camp's done?
See, that's the biggest question. We mentioned linebacker, but on the other side of the ball, that's where the whole time Ron's been here, it's like, what's going on this O-line? I think it'll be Wiley, Cosme. Center is interesting. I think you'll see Gates to start. Left guard, I could not tell you. I have no idea. And then you'll see Leno. I don't know if they're going to try to move like Stromberg in there or try to. Norwell's for some reason still on the roster, so I guess maybe he'll be the guy to start.
He's probably a post June 1.
I would assume, yeah.
More money or whatever.
So I don't know about left guard. That's the big, hole. I haven't liked how they've handled the O-line. It's a lot of patchwork. The only guy they've taken before, a couple weeks ago was Cosme. That was it. Everything else has been a veteran signing. Or, Chase wasn't drafted here. Chase Roulier wasn't drafted here. Obviously, he got bored one day and cut Morgan Moses. So, which I wasn't happy about. So, yeah, the O-line's kind of bugged me the whole way. I'm curious to see. I'll trust Bieniemy with Wiley, though. And then Cosme, we're all told when we took him that he'd probably be better if he kicked inside. So, I'm not too worried about the right side, but the left side, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting, George. I've seen mostly all good things about Stromberg in the third. And I was stunned when Nagy said they didn't invite him because they didn't have him on the board of draftable players.
Yeah.
And I thought that was wild, but I'll tell you what, I saw the pictures of him in the line, and I know they don't have pads on, but he's not very big.
Okay.
Like for go take a look. They showed it like down the line, and for 310 or 315, whatever he is, he's got like chicken legs.
I was surprised by that too. Like actually walking away from the draft, Doug, I was like 3rd round pick Stromberg. That's a pretty solid pick. I think he was mostly rated like the 2nd or 3rd center behind like John Michael Schmitz and Wilper from Ohio State. He actually was the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Year, wasn't he? I'm pretty sure he was. So it is crazy.
Coach for Arkansas is one of the great. Michael Pittman, Coach Pittman, Sam Pittman is one of the great O-line coaches. In the history of O-line coaches. So yeah, that would surprise me a bit. I wonder if they will try to work Gates over to left guard.
I think that's an option.
Play Stromberg at center. If you want Stromberg to play center long term, if that's like the goal, to me, just put him at center.
Get him there.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't let him play left guard so that Nick Gates can play 2 years of center because you gave him a contract.
And plus, if Howell's the real deal, have that synergy with that center and a young quarterback together, kind of grow together as well. I like that. I agree.
I saw that post today. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it's like Howell is still like the 4th youngest quarterback in the league right now.
I saw that.
He's like drafted super young.
Yeah.
I asked you guys to pick out 3 games. We'll kind of wrap up with that. 3 games that really pique your interest that may be important when we look back at the season. Eric, let's start with your 3. I think this is an interesting exercise because there's some interesting games on the list.
Yeah, I mean, the first one, this might be like cliche, but the week 1 game, like the NFL blessed them with Arizona.
I have week 1 on my list of the 3.
Yeah, that's the biggest one for me because the NFL is like handing us a gift. They're like, look, this is expected to be the worst team in the league. Like, you guys have got to win this. Dan's gone. Please win this. We'll do anything to win. I would take the Cardinals in that, but but that's the biggest one for me because again, starting 1-0, that would be perfect to end Dan. I would say this might sound weird, but correct me if I'm wrong, the Thursday nighters against Chicago again, right?
Yeah, the 5th of October.
Yeah, that for whatever reason to me, that one that's gonna be in prime time. So I think it's important that they win that. I'm a big Fields fan, so I'm curious to see how they take. I think Fields is going to have a great year, so I'm curious to see how this defense can go up against a young dynamic.
to me, that's been the biggest mistake of Ron's career
Yeah.
was not giving up the extra first to get up for Fields. I really thought they were going to pull that. Apparently, they were into Fields, and maybe that was a thing. Why they decided not to. I think he'll look back as that'll be his biggest regret when he's not in Washington anymore. I would think.
Yeah, that I would have done the same thing. And the Bears did again. Like there's a lack of aggression with some of these things with this regime. It's always kind of like, we'll stay here, and if the guy is a great guy, we'll take him. So, but yeah, and then I'd say the third game, I mean, the Thanksgiving Dallas game. I mean, that could be the most watched game of the whole year for the NFL.
Yeah.
You got to perform there. That's where that every year is like for me, that's the game that always pops on the schedule. It's just, they've got to win that. You got to beat Dallas on Thanksgiving, like you did in 2020. Got to. Yeah. Gibson game, by the way.
That's right. That was the wave game. That's right.
Yeah,
I love it.
To me, George, I'll get yours in a second here. To me, the first three and the last three, like the Thanksgiving game, I totally agree. I think it'll be a blast and it'll be fun to win. I always, when we do these wacky, pick the winners and losers before the season starts, I always just give each team in the division their home game to win, and I take, and vice versa. So as far as how that goes, but to me, there's no way, like they start out with the Cardinals, the Broncos, the Bills, the Eagles, and then that Bears game, and they cannot get off to a typical Ron Rivera start. 1-3, no way, man. He can't do it. And then everything starts imploding. And I don't mean that they don't get rid of Ron right there. Like, I don't know. I think you feel the same way, George, but like, I feel that new ownership probably gives Ron the year, right? It's easier to just give Ron the year. Now they may replace him with a GM, but as far as coaching goes, I could totally see where they're like, we want to see what it is. But every year he starts out 1-4, 1-3, 2-5. As far as getting anywhere this season, you can't do it. And then the last three, right? Like if they're actually playing good football, if they actually start out the season, say 500, then you're going to look at these last three games: the Jets, San Francisco, and the Cowboys. So it's like that we bookend these things because the middle games are always fluky. Right, it feels like those middle of the season games are determined by a turnover or a missed field goal or bad clock management.
Always one. Always.
That's a long way to get to your three games, George.
No, that's all good. So I'm on the same ilk as you guys. Like, I think the Arizona Cardinals game, week 1, I think the fans are going to come out. I think they're going to have a nonverbal message. They're going to go to the game. They want to send a message to the league that Dan Snyder is broken off of us, and they're going to come. It's going to be pretty much full stadium. And we've talked about it earlier on the show. We can't let the fans down. This is not a game to, lose to Colt McCoy and have this like heartbreaking game. We need to kind of set the tone. And basically, this is a new era for DC. We have to set it off the right way. So that's what I have there. Then I'm going to go a different angle with it. I mean, obviously Thanksgiving game's a lot of fun, but I knew that was going to be like a popular topic. So I went a different direction. Seattle Seahawks, November 12th, right? Yeah. I think that Washington is going to be in the playoff hunt. I think we're going to be hovering around 500. And if you want to if you want to go to the playoffs, you have to beat the playoff teams to get there, right? So if you want that head-to-head matchup, if you want to get that tiebreaker, you have to beat Seattle in order to get that spot. I think they're going to be pretty good. I think Seattle had a great draft. I like Geno Smith. Pete Carroll's a great coach. It's going to be a competitive matchup. That's actually at Seattle. I want to go to that game so bad, but it's too expensive for me. I love to go to that game. And then it's cheating, but the week afterwards, right? The New York Giants. We're playing the New York Giants on November 19th. That's 4 days before the Thanksgiving game. Just like my same kind of narrative as the Seahawks, I think we're going to be competing with the Giants for, maybe third, second in the division, something along that lines. We have to beat them there if we want to have the head-to-head. And then 4 days later, we go to Dallas to have that Thanksgiving game. It'll be a pretty crappy way to lose and then go into another divisional matchup 4 days later on short rest. It's a very important game to win. How awesome would it be to knock off the Giants and the Cowboys in 4 straight days? That'd be fantastic, right? So that's my 3 big games.
Assumedly, you'd be heading to the playoffs if you did that, George.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, that time of year.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And the NFC West does not scare me like it did 2 or 3 years ago.
Nah.
Right?
Cardinals are falling off. Rams falling off. I agree.
Yeah. And frankly, we'll see. Gino's got to do it another year before I'm on the Geno Smith train.
I agree with that.
If he does it again, kudos to him, because he'll be the only guy that didn't get it done in the first 6 years, and then all of a sudden had these playoff worthy, I'll put you on my back and take you places. Like,
It'd be quite the story.
I'm rooting for Gino,
Yeah.
but not against us. Actually, he got screwed over pretty much throughout his career, so I wouldn't mind if he does pretty well, but not against us.
there's no doubt. Eric, are you usually like a glass half full or a glass half empty type guy?
I'd say I'm glass half full, definitely with this team. Like I never go into the season thinking we're going to have like the third pick, but like with, I'm never that guy. I'm always hovering. Like I always say, 8 wins maybe. Now that's obviously the easiest answer when someone asks you that. But again, like this is to me one of the better rosters in the league. The issue is, of course, quarterback again. But there's a lot of teams around the league like that. Like you have you look at San Francisco every year. And we still don't know who their quarterback's going to be this year. They've got 3 options. Yet that's probably the best roster. So you look at that, you look at teams like the Saints. I mean, you have Derek Carr now, but the last couple of years, they've had a great team, but they've had no quarterback. So it's one of those things like you've won 8 games last year with Heineke and Wentz. All you need is for Sam Howell to be 2 games better with Eric Bieniemy. Like Eric Bieniemy just has to be 2 games better than Scott Turner. So it's like that's how I look at it. And we've spent the last 2 years, we were telling ourselves, oh man, if Ryan Fitzpatrick, like we convinced ourselves that Ryan Fitzpatrick could get us to the playoffs. We did. Most of us did. There was always
100%.
The national media was convinced Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, 10 wins with Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's crazy.
He can just play like he did in Miami. They'll go to the playoffs. And then we did the same thing last year with Wentz. And here we are. Now, my thing with Sam, though, not to get off topic, but like I tweeted this a couple months ago. This will be the first time that the sitting coaching staff starts a quarterback in week 1 that they drafted since Mike Shanahan started RG3 in 2013.
Wow.
It's 10 years. Everything else was a hand-me-down. Obviously, Jay got lucky with Kirk, but, Dwayne didn't start until Ron got here. And, obviously Ron didn't draft Ryan or Carson or anything. So, like, it's unique to me. Like, I think that's a pretty big deal. Like, the coaching staff started a quarterback that they drafted.
Washington and Cleveland has had the most notorious QB carousels like around the entire NFL. It's crazy. It's awful.
Yeah.
It is crazy. And that's a great stat, Eric. George, did you know that? If I knew that, I hadn't even thought about it.
No,
which makes me feel even better about this notion that it will be how. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I always kind of have in my mind, like, they keep telling us how, but we'll see, because Brissett is not trash.
No,
I don't know that he's a top 15 quarterback. I mean, maybe he's got a little Geno Smith in him, George, but not likely. So that is great point there for Howell's benefit, I think.
Yeah,
because I'd like to see a full 17 with Howell. Like, to me, it makes no sense to do anything else.
I hate the back and forth. Like I actually think, though, I will say, had Brissett started last year for us, they might go to the playoffs. Like I don't think he's that much better, but. Like, I think, does he beat Cleveland? Maybe.
Yeah.
So
if they don't put Wentz in.
Yeah. Heineke would have beat it. He would have beat the Browns. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Do you think if the ownership situation wasn't in flux, that Rivera gets fired after that Browns game? Like, if it was an owner that was going to be here for a long time, like that, we talk about not going up for Fields, but not understanding the consequences of that Browns game and going back to Wentz when it was obvious the locker room did not want anything to do with Wentz. Do you think that got Ron fired if it was a owner that was going to be here for a while? Because I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ron's leash is longer here than it would have been anywhere. Dan was lucky to have him hired. No one thought we'd get him. Of course, we knew what he did with Carolina in 2015, but I mean, other than that, a lot of people are like, oh, well, other than that, he's losing records almost every year. But we were still like, this is a great dude for someone like Dan to be able to get on board. And I think that was kind of Dan's last like pitch to the fan base. And then since then, it's, of course, a million things have happened, and it got to a point where it didn't matter. But yeah, I don't think Ron would be here right now if any other owner were here. I see what you're saying. I don't know if it would have been right after the Cleveland game, but like at the end of the year, I think you would have seen a big change. At least the GM side of things.
Let's wrap with this, George. Eric brought up a great point that they've been hovering around 500 with sub 5, well below sub 500 quarterback play.
Mhm.
And I gladly and openly admit I was wrong on Turner. I thought he'd get it figured out. He did not get it figured out. So where do you stand, George, on Eric's point that if they get anything close to top 15 play caller, top 15, I mean, they didn't average 20 points last year,
Yeah.
right? So again, I mean, if you can get up to that 21, 24 point threshold, how many games did they win last year? Are you encouraged by that, George, or are you done being encouraged by things that we're supposed to be encouraged by?
No, I'm encouraged. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think if Eric Bieniemy is as advertised, and all things I'm hearing is great positive results that we're hearing so far, because I think the reason why Washington wasn't winning and kind of exceeding that 500, like the NFL is designed for you to be 500, right? We just couldn't
That's right.
exceed that. We couldn't exceed that 1 or 2 extra wins because we were inefficient in the red zone, or the third downs weren't great. Like, we couldn't have those great play calls. There's always something that's a little bit off. But I think Eric Bieniemy, he's renowned for being a good red zone caller. I think he's being more efficient with, the play calling. I'm already hearing that he's restructuring the offensive staff with Washington. And one great thing I'm hearing as well is that he's going to hide the offensive line. We already know that Scott Turner kind of put a lot of pressure on them to more like receive the defensive lineman and kind of like hold up hold off the rush. It's gonna be more of a quick passing game. And I think Bieniemy's gonna be more efficient. So if high accountability, more efficiency with our team, and then a better defense. Honestly, we added some high talent on our defense. If our defense can take away 3 points from the opposing offense and we score another touchdown more, then I think we will get 2 more wins. So I agree with that. I think it's the whole season depends on Eric Bieniemy and Sam Howell, man. So we'll see how it goes.
Which is good and scary.
Which is good and scary. 100%. I agree.
Eric, I don't know how we didn't get you on the show before, but and I didn't know what to expect, but you were great, man. I had a great time today. We'd love to have you back again.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Sometime closer to when the season gets started. This was great.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, George. You're great. Both you guys. Thank you so much.
George is okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no, seriously, it was great. Just ask me anytime. I'll come right on for sure.
That was great. And George, we'll see you Monday.
All right, sounds good, guys. Take care. See you
all
later.
Right, fellas, thanks.
Bye.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.